Purpose of catalytic converter, why it's needed, how to diagnose it. The purpose of catalytic converter is to convert harmful engine gases into less harmful engine gases. Does that by chemical reaction. Catalytic converter does need to reach a certain temperature in order for it to start working. How does the computer diagnose that you got a catalytic converter fault? P0420, P0430, P0421, P0431 are your most common catalytic converter codes. Computer looks at the oxygen content before and after the catalytic converter. The oxygen content before the catalytic converter fluctuates constantly from rich to lean, which means you have less oxygen or more oxygen. The O2 sensor that's after the catalytic converter reads more stable oxygen levels in the exhaust. Generally, if the upstream oxygen sensor is switching from rich to lean 10 times, if the computer sees the downstream O2 sensor switching less than 7 times, it's going to say your catalytic converter efficiency is good. If the ratio is than 1 to 0.7, computer will trigger the code. Most commonly, if you got a catalytic converter code, you most likely got a bad catalytic converter. However, there are certain things that can cause the computer to think you got a bad catalytic converter while your catalytic converter is doing its job. If your upstream O2 sensor is old and sluggish, and your downstream O2 sensor is working properly, that can make the computer think that the catalytic converter is not doing its job. If you got an air leak or exhaust leak, which is introducing oxygen into the exhaust system or taking it out, that can make the computer think the catalytic converter is not doing its job. If your fuel trim, which means that engine is not burning stoichiometric air-fuel ratio, which is 14.7% air to 1% fuel, if that fuel trim is not correct, that can cause the computer to think the catalytic converter is not working correctly. So common things to check for: fuel trim, exhaust leak, and O2 sensor operation. There are different designs of catalytic converters. This is your manifold catalytic converter. It's also called a pre-cat. If you got a code for that, you're gonna most likely get P0421 or P0431. Versus if you got a downstream catalytic converter code, you're gonna get a P0420 or P0430. The difference between 20 and 30 is bank 1, bank 2. Again, 21, 31, bank 1, bank 2. Originally, they always used to only have a catalytic converter underneath your car. They're starting to put catalytic converters on the manifold a lot because, again, like I said, the catalytic converter only works once it reaches a certain temperature. And in order to heat them up faster, they're moving them closer to the engine. But we do have space limitation under the hood. So they're using smaller catalytic converters just so they can start reducing the harmful gases sooner than later. But then they have a bigger one on the bottom downstream to reduce the exhaust gases or make the exhaust gases less harmful. We can talk about the O2 sensors, how they work, what they do. O2 sensors measure the amount of oxygen in the exhaust system. They're piezoelectric sensors, meaning they create their own voltage. The greater the oxygen difference between inside the exhaust pipe and the outside the exhaust pipe, they're going to create more voltage. The common design of O2 sensor create from 0 to 0.99 volts. Again, the higher the voltage, that means the greater the oxygen difference. That means there's excessive fuel burning versus the air that's coming in. Or another way of saying that is the fuel ratio is more fuel to air That's why you don't have enough oxygen left over in the exhaust system, which is why the voltage of the O2 sensor is going higher, causing it to be a rich condition versus a lean condition. If you have excessive oxygen left over after the fuel and air mixture burns in the engine, the reason you have excessive oxygen left over is because you didn't have enough fuel, which would be lean condition. And again, if you have higher oxygen content left over in the exhaust system, the voltage of the oxygen sensor will be below 0.5, which is the halfway there. So the lower the voltage, the lean the exhaust, the higher the voltage of the O2 sensors, the richer the exhaust. You have an upstream O2 sensor, which is giving the feedback to the engine control module to control the amount of fuel it's putting in by controlling the pulse width of the fuel injector. The downstream O2 sensor purpose is only to check the catalytic converter. And again, it does that by comparing the switching ratio from upstream O2 sensor to downstream O2 sensor. Designs of O2 sensors, after the single wire original O2 sensor, they started putting heater elements inside the O2 sensor because the O2 sensor also had to get hot before it worked. So they started putting heater elements inside to heat them up faster so they can go to closed loop faster. Closed loop just means now the engine control module is going to look at the O2 sensor and control the injector pulse width module, the amount of gas that's going in. Before the oxygen sensor gets hot enough and it goes into closed loop, the car is in open loop. It's running at a fixed value, looking at engine coolant temperature, mass airflow sensor or MAP sensor, depending on which design of system you have, and the throttle angle. The newer design go to closed loop faster because they heat up the oxygen sensor faster. They went from 1-wire O2 sensor to 3-wire O2 sensor to 4-wire O2 sensor. And the latest O2 sensor that they got right now is your air-fuel ratio sensors. Those do also move rich to lean, but they move very slightly off their bases, and computer does not look at the voltage, it looks at the amperage. That's a whole another video because there's a lot of information I gotta go through for that. But your basic O2 sensors, that's what they do. They measure the amount of oxygen in the exhaust system, give that feedback to the computer. Computer controls the air to fuel mixture using that, and then it uses the downstream O2 sensor just to diagnose your catalytic converter. So the topic of this video was how to diagnose catalytic converter. Make sure your upstream O2 sensor is switching fine, make sure your downstream O2 sensor is switching fine, make sure you got no exhaust leak, and you can hook up a scanner, go into live data, look at the fuel trim to make sure that's normal within single digits, 9, 10, 9, 8, 10, 11, 12, something's going on. It might be important to investigate if you're anything in double digits. But if you're in single digits fuel trims, rich or lean, and you got no exhaust leaks and your O2 sensors are working properly, I would feel pretty comfortable saying that you need a new catalytic converter. And that's all I got for you.